Hi, Patrick. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, Fredsen, great to be here.
So, in today's discussion, we're going to be talking about Script 2023 and its impact on EPCS certification. To start off, my name is Fredsen Otchere-Jan. I'm going to be the moderator for today's discussion. I'm pleased to be joined by Patrick Pascal, who's the Director of Information Security and Interoperability Services here at Drummond. He's going to be our subject matter expert, guiding us through the technical details of what's changed in the latest script standard. Patrick, do you want to add on to anything before we begin?
No, I appreciate that, Fredsen. We're excited to be presenting some information about the new script standard that's coming. It's part of the CMS requirement that it needs to be implemented by January 1st, 2028. And over the next couple of years, lots of folks are going to be making this transition to the new standard. And we wanted to explain how it's going to impact EPCS specifically. There's a lot of great materials out there about the technical details about the change, but our presentation today will be specifically focused on how it will impact your EPCS certification and what to look out for over the next coming years.
Amazing. You know what? Let's just get straight into it. Let's start with some good news for those concerned about recertification scope. What changes in Script 2023 should our audiences understand won't affect their EPCS certification requirements?
Yeah, so there's a huge portion of the changes that are not going to be part of your EPCS criteria. Changes to medication history, the new RX request workflow, changes to electronic prior authorization, and the new versions of real-time prescription benefit and formulary benefit are not going to be impacting your EPCS certification. Focus on the areas that will be impacted. We will get into further detail throughout our presentation today.
So that's actually really helpful context. Thank you. And digging a little bit deeper into that, can you walk us through why medication history and electronic prior authorization, even though they're a part of the same script standard, don't fall under EPCS certification criteria?
Sure. So EPCS certification is only required when changes are made that impact the process for issuing it or receiving a controlled substance prescription. The context around issuing a prescription, like prior authorization or retrieving a patient's medication history, are not part of the DEA standards. DEA is only concerned with messages that are going to authorize the dispensing of a controlled substance medication itself.
Okay, so that actually makes sense why those fall outside of the scope. Then talking about that, but actually shifting gears to changes that have more of a broader impact, Script 2023 expands patient demographic field significantly. What specific patient data elements are new, and how do they affect controlled substance prescription messages?
Great. So the new NCPDP standard has added a variety of fields to provide more detail about patients' demographic information. Things like additional identifiers, gender identity, sex, pronoun, race and ethnicity information that might be able to provide additional context or information about that particular patient. The good news is, though, that these additional fields are not going to impact EPCS transaction. DEA is only concerned with two fields when it comes to patient information, and that's their name and address. While these new fields are useful and provide additional context, they're not something that you have to worry about in order to meet your EPCS certification requirement.
Got it. Okay, so then while we're on the topic of data requirements, there seems to be some potential confusion around diagnosis requirements. Can you clarify the difference between patient-level diagnosis and the existing message-level diagnosis requirements, particularly for substances like GHB?
Yeah. So another new field is a patient-level diagnosis that can be sent with the prescription information. And that's basically identifying broader conditions that patient may have. These fields, while new, are not going to replace the prescription level diagnosis fields that you're used to in a controlled substance prescription. And those prescription level diagnoses are what is typically used to validate the GHB need of a patient. So there's a particular requirement in DEA that says if a patient is being prescribed a medication which contains GHB, the pharmacy needs to be notified about that patient's need for that prescription. And the prescription level diagnosis should remain in use for that field. You should not replace that with the patient level diagnosis with the new standard.
Okay, so that's actually an important distinction to understand. Let me ask you about another change that affects a specific group of prescribers. For compounding providers prescribing controlled substances, what does the new product section with compound information mean for EPCS certification and compliance?
This is actually an area where compound prescribers and compound pharmacies should be really excited. There's new functionality to support compound medications where previously it was a bit difficult to squeeze in all that information under the old standard. The new standard has this new compound information field where you can fully list out a compound prescription, all the different components, all the different ingredients that are used. This is a particular concern for controlled substances if the compound contains a controlled substance medication. You need to make sure that you're properly listing the controlled substance medication and the strength or the percentage that it makes up in the compound. Very important to be able to determine accurately exactly how much of the controlled substance is being issued in the medication. So if you're one of these compounding pharmacies and looks to take advantage of that section, that is something that will be paid extra attention to during your DEA certification.
Okay, that's good to know. It's good to know where compounding fits in there. And to move on to some changes around renewals and change requests. So let's talk about the significant new requirement that came up pertaining to expiration date enforcement on renewal requests. What exactly must EPCS applications now do that they weren't required to do before?
Yeah, so there's a new data field for an expiration date of a renewal request. And this comes into play where there's a request sent by the pharmacy and an expiration date associated with that, where the prescriber should no longer respond to that request. And this can be set by the pharmacist to let the prescriber know, hey, after a certain amount of time, I'm no longer going to be able to appropriately fill a response to this message. And what should take place is that the prescribing application should check those expiration dates and not allow responses to messages that have passed their expiration.
Okay, so that's good to know. That's a hard requirement. Expiration dates must be enforced and checked. And there was also another piece in it that I think needed a bit more clarification. And that was the message indicator flag for restriction/withdrawal, which I think is very interesting. A prescription can be withdrawn, but still needs to be digitally signed and archived. Can you explain the logic behind this and what it means practically?
Yeah, this is a new workflow where a request, like a renewal request, can be withdrawn by the requester. So, for example, the pharmacy issues a renewal request to a provider, but circumstances change where the patient no longer needs those renewals. They can issue a retraction message to retract that request. And what we'd want to see is that the prescriber is not able to respond to a message that has been retracted, that they're honoring the pharmacy's intentions in retracting a message, but they are still maintaining an archive of the original request so that in the event of an audit or an investigation that occurs, they're able to keep track of those original messages and show that what was received and then later retracted.
All right, thank you. That makes a lot of sense. And actually, if we move over, I actually kind of want to talk about the new pending response types. Can you confirm this doesn't create any new EPCS certification requirements? What exactly is its purpose?
Yeah, so the pending response is another way to use that message indicator flag. And that's a way for the prescriber to let the pharmacy know that a message response is going to be pending. So maybe that it's been received, been processed by a nurse or low-level practitioner, and that a response will be coming from the doctor. One other thing that we should touch on as well when it comes to renewal requests is the prohibit renewal request flag that's part of the standard as well. And this is a flag that can be set by the prescribers to let the pharmacy know, please don't send me any renewal requests for this prescription. And this is another factor that will be taken into account in EPCS certification for pharmacy providers, that if they receive a message that has the prohibit renewal response flag set, they should not allow a pharmacist to issue a renewal for that message.
Perfect. That makes a ton of sense. Now, one thing I want to do, and I want to get into what's probably one of the biggest additions here, and that's for prescription transfers for controlled substances. Can you walk us through the July 2023 DEA final rule that enabled this and what Script 2023 adds to make it work?
Yeah, so the DEA published a new final rule that allowed for controlled substance prescriptions to be transferred from one pharmacy to another. And the new script standard enables this in a way that was not previously possible under the old script standard. The old script standard had a pull workflow where one pharmacy could request a message to be sent to them from another pharmacy. The new script standard supports push and pull workflows where a pharmacy, unprompted, can send a prescription to another pharmacy. So let's say you have a patient that's going to be traveling or going out of state and they need to transfer their prescription to a different pharmacy to get it filled. With the new workflows, that has been enabled like it has not been previously.
Okay, great. So they basically have the green light there, which leads me to my next question. If a pharmacy receives a transferred controlled substance prescription, what EPCS requirement kicks in? Are these the same as receiving a new prescription?
That's right, they are. So
Okay.
a transferred incoming prescription should be treated just like a new prescription. So if prescription is transferred in with the signature indicator flag, that flag should be validated and archived. And if it's got a digital signature embedded in the message, then the pharmacist needs to verify that cryptographically, just like they do for new prescriptions as well.
Got it. So then I actually want to talk about signatures because one thing that I was wondering is the digital signature requirement for transfers. Does the receiving pharmacy need the original signature or is there an indicator option? What exactly must be archived in that situation?
Yeah. So sort of expand a little bit on my previous response. There are two ways that a controlled substance prescription can be sent. It can have the signature indicator flag included, or it can have a encrypted signature in the data itself, an encrypted hash of the prescription message. And this creates a potential complication when it comes to transfers, where one pharmacy is enabled to receive prescriptions with the embedded signature, but the transferring pharmacy is not enabled to receive those. So here's what needs to take place. First, let's talk about the easy case. The easy scenario is when the signature indicator flag is being used. When the first pharmacy receives that message, they should create a digital signature for that prescription data and save it. And then when they send it to another pharmacy, they should send the prescription with the indicator flag still set. And then the second destination pharmacy will create an encrypted hash when they receive the message. Now, when it comes to a prescription that already has the signature information embedded in it, what's required at the first receiving pharmacy is that they validate that signature, that they decrypt the signature and they check the message hash to make sure that it's correct. And then when they transfer it to the next pharmacy, they leave that signature information included in the message. And the destination, the second receiving pharmacy would be required to repeat those validations to make sure the message has not been tampered or altered with during transmission. The problem arises is that what if the first pharmacy is equipped to receive prescriptions with the embedded signature, but the second pharmacy isn't? And in that scenario, what has to happen is that second pharmacy has to reject that message. They can't accept that transfer with the embedded signature, just like they could not accept a new prescription with the embedded signature information. And that first pharmacy, they should not, under any circumstance, edit or change that prescription so that it could be accepted by the receiving pharmacy. Prescriptions must be transferred intact and unaltered.
Okay. Thank you. So there's a bit of complexity there. So thank you for clarifying. So what about other data that needs to be captured? So for example, source pharmacy information is now mandatory for controlled substances. What specific data elements must be captured in that situation and why?
Yeah, so source pharmacy is a new required data element. Typically, this is not part of the required data or a controlled substance prescription. But when a transfer occurs, that must be added. And so the transferring pharmacy must include their pharmacy information as the transferring pharmacy data so that when the new pharmacy receives it, they'll know what sort of stops it made along the way before it got to them.
Gotcha. That makes a ton of sense. And then going into more practical scenarios. So let's look at patient A, right? He goes to pharmacy A. They don't have the controlled substance in stock. What's the compliant workflow to transfer to pharmacy B under the new standard?
Yeah. So under the new standard that allows that push workflow, patient can ask their pharmacist to transfer that prescription to another destination. And so maybe it's a different pharmacy down the street that would have the appropriate stock to be able to meet their needs. And whereas before, where you can only pull prescriptions, then that pharmacist would have to follow a sort of convoluted workflow to call the other pharmacy to have them initiate a pull request to receive it from the pharmacy. Fortunately, that's been way simplified under the new versions, and that pharmacist can simply initiate the transfer, send it to the new pharmacy, and the new pharmacy would receive it just like they would a new prescription.
Okay, so that actually really brings it to life. Thanks for walking through that. So from a testing and certification standpoint, then, what are the implications for EPCS certification testing? What new test cases will be needed or would be needed?
For new certification standards for pharmacists, we would need to simulate some of these transfers. We need to simulate a transfer going out and a transfer going in. For transfers going out, we'd confirm that that source pharmacy information is being correctly added and the signature information is being correctly applied. And for prescriptions coming in, let's say they're the recipient of a transfer, we would confirm that they treat that all the same validations and checks that they would for a brand new prescription.
Okay, so that makes a ton of sense. Those are definitely scenarios that need to be validated. Speaking of that, let's move into our last topic, something specifically designed for long-term care. So long-term care facilities have struggled with EPCS compliance because of their unique workflow. Can you describe this challenge that they're facing and how the three-party model in Script 2023 addresses it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So long-term care facilities have had struggles with EPCS because there's a unique sort of three-party process that's being used. There's the prescriber, who's the one responsible for signing the controlled substance prescriptions. There's the long-term care facility that's responsible for delivering and administrating the prescriptions to the patients. And then there's the pharmacy that has to fill the prescription. And with the new NCPDP workflow, this process is going to have explicit support where a long-term care facility can now act as a third-party intermediary when it comes to transferring or transmitting a controlled substance prescription to be allowed to add the key operational context to a prescription message that is needed to get it filled at the pharmacy and to serve that patient's need at the facility.
Okay, wow, that actually, it frames the problem really well. And so I actually want to get a little bit more concrete. Can you walk us through more of a practical example? So a physician prescribes a controlled substance for a nursing home patient. What happens at each step of that process?
Yeah. So the prescriber process is going to remain the same as it would for any new controlled substance prescription. Prescriber will prepare the normal prescription details, sign the prescription with two-factor authentication, and transmit that prescription. However, instead of that prescription going directly to the pharmacy, it instead now goes to the long-term care facility. And that long-term care facility can now add additional details about the prescription: delivery instructions, routing information, administrative schedule, workflow notes, anything that they might have particular insight to that the prescriber might not. And then from there, the prescription message can then get forwarded on to the pharmacy for fulfillment with that additional context that's been added by the long-term care facility.
Okay, that makes sense. So that's actually super helpful to get it step by step like that. But there's an important line here that I want to get into about what facilities can and can't do. So the facility can add operational context, but can't change prescription context. What's the bright line there? Can you give an example of what's allowed versus what's prohibited?
Yeah. So what is allowed is anything that is not specifically flagged by the DEA as part of a controlled substance prescription. So the controlled substance prescription elements from the DEA are patient details, the prescriber's information, and the specific information about that controlled substance medication. So the drug name, the strength, the dosage form, the quantity prescribed, and the directions for use. Those things cannot be altered by the long-term care facility because that would invalidate the prescription that the prescriber originally signed. Instead, the long-term care facility can add additional context or delivery information about that prescription. Maybe information about how that patient likes to receive their medication or what sort of schedule that patient is on when it comes to receiving or being administered that particular drug information. Or maybe additional notes, just clarifying information about that patient and the medication they're about to receive. That all can be added, changed or altered by the long-term care facility, as long as they're not making any changes to those prescription elements that the prescriber has signed themselves.
Okay, that makes sense. So there are clear boundaries to maintain prescription integrity. What about the technical side of it? Right now we have digital signatures at each location. Does this mean the facility needs its own signing capability? What are the infrastructure requirements needed to satisfy it?
Yes, that's a great question. And because the facility is now acting as an intermediary for that message, they do need to meet the DEA requirements for digitally signing and archiving prescription data. What is going to be required at the facility is that when they receive a message from the prescriber, that they digitally sign the data that they received and they archive it. So they maintain a copy that shows exactly what was received from the prescriber. Then, once they've added the additional operational context or notes to that message, they will need to sign the message they are sending to the pharmacy so that a record exists. Hey, here's what we received originally. Here's what we added to it, and then transferred on to the pharmacy. And then when the pharmacy receives that, they will digitally sign that message just like they would for any new prescription that they receive. So it creates a very interesting scenario where the long-term care facility has to double sign a message that they are receiving and make sure they're retaining copies of both the original and the new message that they send out.
Okay, that makes total sense. So it seems that facilities need to definitely invest in infrastructure for this. As we wrap up, I did want to touch on testing pieces or about the testing piece. From a certification standpoint, how do you test a three-party workflow? What scenarios does this create?
Yeah, this actually creates an entirely new need for an EPCS certification. So that long-term care facility that's going to be processing, receiving, and sending out those controlled substance medications, they're going to need their own EPCS certification now going forward because they are acting as an intermediary for those controlled substance medications. If you're working with a long-term care facility partner and they have long-term care facility software that's going to be processing controlled substance prescriptions in this way, they need to get a limited scope EPCS certification. It's not exactly going to line up 100% with the prescriber or the pharmacy criteria because they're doing a little bit of both, but instead it'll be a new, unique certification that is tailored towards long-term care facilities and making sure they are meeting all the DEA requirements that now fall on them as part of that message exchange process.
Perfect. That really gives us a complete picture on testing these workflows. Well, I'll say this, it's been a really great discussion, Patrick. I want to thank you again for breaking down all of these technical requirements in such a clear and practical way. For those of you watching, if you have any follow-up questions or want to dive deeper into any of these topics, I encourage you to use the QR code at the bottom of your screen to connect with Patrick directly. Thank you for joining us and watching, and we hope this has been as helpful as we'd like it to be as you navigate the changes in Script 2023. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.